My name is Augusta Cook. My full name is, my maiden name was Say, and I didn't have a middle name, so Augusta Say was my beginning name. My grandmother was named Augusta, and I have an aunt named Augusta, so I think I was named for those two people. I'm glad to be as old as I am. I was born in 1934. I was born in Chester, South Carolina, in a hospital that has been torn down now, but it was Pryor Hospital. But I was raised in Rodman. The house that my mom and dad had was my grandmother's house. And when they married, she moved over to the big house, as we called it. It was a great big house that was built in the 1800s that Charleston people built it as a summer home. And I guess they owned both houses, but when Mom and Dad married, she moved out of what we called the little house that we lived in, and she went to the big house, and they moved into ours. It's just a little farmhouse, 3 bedrooms, kitchen. There was electricity as long as I don't remember it when it didn't have electricity. I can remember when it didn't have indoor plumbing. Yeah. And we had a pump on the back porch that we pumped our water. We were lucky, though. We had the pump right there at the house. You didn't have to go outside. Well, one thing about the house, we had a back porch, and that was where the pump was that we pumped our water in. And it had a big shelf on the porch. And I remember one time falling on, my brother had thrown my shoes out in the rain, and I went out to get them. And when I went out to get them, I fell coming back up the steps and popped my head open. And I remember them carrying me back and putting me on that bench in the back porch so that they could have the water to wash my face, and I'll still have a scar. At that time, the kitchen was a big kitchen, and it had a wood stove. And I can remember Mama cooking with the wood stove and heating with that, because that kept us warm. That was a single source for part of the house. Oh, it was made up of family. That's lots of aunts and uncles and cousins, and more of that than friends. When we were growing up, we had cousins more than we had friends. One of my fondest memories was it was a Christmas when I got my electric stove. And I didn't think it was electric when I went in there. And my sister said, "Oh, yes, it is. It's got a cord." And my brother built a little box that was my kitchen. And we put the electric stove in that kitchen. So that was a special one. I also remember going to my grandmother's on Christmas Eve. We always did that. And she had a great big piano. The big, huge to me at 5 years old. And it mashed my finger. And I cried and I cried. And I remember my grandmother saying, "Now this is enough. You have cried long enough." So you don't forget those kind. Mom was a very loving person. Cared a lot about people and things. She was more outgoing than my dad. My dad was kind of a stay-at-home kind of a fellow. Mom taught music. She started out as a teacher, but after the children came along, she gave up teaching. And she was just a good, sincere Christian lady. My dad was a big, strong fella. You didn't question what he said. What he said, you did. He was not a very demonstrative person as far as showing you love, but you knew it was there. I don't remember him until I was older, cuddling, or, he was just a big dad. But he was away when I was little. After the Depression, he was in CCC camp in Colombia. And he did that for about 8 years. It was a little bit before I was born, so he was not at home for me when I was growing up until I was about 8. But I loved for him to come home on the weekends. That was really special. And one thing I remember, we had my clothes in a little wooden box. And I can remember this, and I wasn't very big when I did this. I rolled my box of clothes out to the front door when Dad was getting ready to go back to Columbia, because I was going home with him. Didn't get to, but that was my plan. My brother Jim was the oldest. My brother Joseph was next, and we called him Joe. And Jim was called Jimmy most of his life until he grew up to be a man, and he dropped the Jimmy and came to be Jim. Joe was the brother who was killed in World War II, and that was a devastating time in our life. My sister Jean is a sweet, strong-willed person. We were very close. Growing up, we were very close. I can remember going hunting and fishing with the boys. And Jim didn't want to fool with us, but Joe would say, "Oh, let him go." So he was a little bit tender-hearted. We did a lot of outside games. We didn't have a whole lot of toys. We built playhouses. We met cousins at the little stream between their house and our house, and we would build a dam in the stream and play there for ever and ever. There were some red hills on the property, and we would get big dish pans and sit down in those dish pans, and one would slide us down the hill, and we had a great time, except that Mom didn't like it too well when we came home with red clothes. But we had a good time with that. Had a lot of fun with cousins. I remember going to my Aunt Mary's and Uncle Porter's house, and they had big cotton. They had cotton, and we would play on the bales of cotton. And so we did a lot of outside things. The music came from my mom playing or my sister playing, and that was the way we entertained ourselves, was with music. Jean would play and I would sing, if you can call it that, but at one time I could carry tune a little bit better than now. So music really was a big thing. I can remember my dad lying on the sofa and having classical music on the radio. And you'd think, I'm going to go cut that off. He's asleep. And as soon as you cut that radio off, he woke up and said, "Where's my music?" So we had all kinds of different music. Played basketball, loved basketball. But the school was so small, and we didn't have football. When we first started playing, we didn't have an indoor gym. We played outside on the ground. Basketball was my big thing. I played softball, but I didn't particularly like softball. I was afraid I was going to miss the ball. In school, I guess my best subject was maybe English. I liked home economics. We had home economics, and I liked that. My worst subject was algebra. I can remember taking French, but I couldn't say anything in French anymore. Had a good time in high school, though. High school was special. we were known as that 8th grade when we got to high school, and we stayed that grade until we finished. So we were kind of rounders. Well, some of them were cousins, because as I say, we grew up a lot with cousins. And then Jane Reed and Mildred Grass and Joe Gaston. And, those were some of the Alan and Anna Jo Simpson. They were cousins, but they were also friends in school. So we had a good time in high school. We had a very small class. We had 19 in our senior class, and we've had 2 reunions since then. We got together for our 48th, and then we got together for our 50th. We hadn't been together much since then. Well, you're thinking about high school days, and I remember going to the beach and putting a streak through my hair. And when I came home, you would have thought I had committed murder. My brother just had such a fit over the streak in my hair. We weren't supposed to do those kinds of things. So that was one thing that everybody was doing in those days. I usually wore my hair long, and about my senior year I cut it, and I found out that it had some curl in it after I cut it. As I was growing up, Mother always braided it, and she always did the pretty little French braids that are really pretty. I had a friend who had just straight braids, but hers were nice and long, and I was so jealous of those nice long braids. And mine would have been long, except Mama was doing the fancy stuff and putting French braids. I don't know that I had any outstanding heroes when I was growing up. I remember my cousin just thought the Lone Ranger was wonderful, and he belonged to the Lone Ranger Club, and I was so upset because I didn't get to belong to the Lone Ranger Club. One of my favorite things when I was growing up were pets. I had dogs and cats, and we lived on a farm, had cows and chickens and pigs, and Dad would always let us name a pig, and that was your special pig, but then all of a sudden that special pig would be gone, and you knew where that pig had gone. One thing that I entertained myself with was just going and sitting with the dogs or the cats, and they were my playmates always have been. I can remember having company one time, and I was so upset because the mama cat was not coming back to her kittens, and I couldn't settle myself down, and Mama kept saying, "She'll come back, those are her kittens, she'll come back." But it didn't satisfy me. I was really upset over that. And we had company, so of course I shouldn't have been showing off. We did a lot of hymns. For one thing, my mom and I did a lot more hymns after I was grown, and I would go down to visit her on Sunday afternoons. She always played, and we played hymns. But my sister Jean would play anything that was popular, and she had a knack of being able to just play it by ear. I could pick it out by my finger, and she would take what I would pick out and put the rest of it to it. So we did a lot of singing of just what was popular at the time. But I can remember Mom teaching us a lot of the patriotic songs that were World War I songs, and we would sing those. And during World War II, we knew all of the songs that dealt with the different branches of service. We grew up as Presbyterians, and I'm still a Presbyterian. Went to a little church called Fishing Creek Presbyterian Church. My mom was a Methodist, before she married, and so the Methodist church was close by. So at any time that they had anything special going on, we went to the Methodist church too. But Mom played the organ in the Presbyterian church for about 40 years, so we were there almost every Sunday. At that time, it was just a little country church and didn't have much Sunday school rooms or activity buildings like we have today, but we were always there. I was about 8, I guess, about World War II time. And I can remember lying on the sofa and watching the maneuvers come in to our land and my grandmother's land. And of course I didn't understand what all was going on, but it was upsetting for the adults and around. But I can remember going over at my grandmother's house. They put tanks. It was just a whole battery of tanks. And we would go over and the soldiers would let us not ride, but sit in the tanks. And they were very gracious to those people who paid them some attention. They were all around our house, different types of battalions. And we had a deer at that time, and they got in behind the fence where the deer was and frightened her, and she jumped the fence. And that was upsetting. But we found her and wrangled back, but she'd jump it again because she just wasn't used to that commotion. I remember Mother fixing food and taking it down to some of the soldiers. And I said, "Why are you doing that?" And she says, "Well, I hope somebody's doing it for my boys." So it was a time that you really remember. Both of the brothers, Jim was in the Air Force, and he went in first. Joe went in as an infantry person, and they were just really kids. Joe was, I think, 19 when he was killed. Jim was in Air Force, and he flew pilot. I can remember when the news came about Joe. It was, they say you remember the good things. It's either real good or it's real bad. Well, that was one of the real bad. I was at home playing dress up, and I didn't want anybody to know I was playing dress up, so I hid for a while until I could get all the makeup off. Everything cleared up, and that was when we found out that he was missing in action. About a month later, the word came that he had been killed in action. He was killed in 1944, August 1st of 1942. He was in St. Lo, France, and I don't think that he was in the big D-Day invasion. I think he had been where he was for about 6 months before he was killed. But now, as I say, my memory's not as good as it maybe should be. I rode on a float when I was in high school for the Christmas parade, and that picture came out in the paper. I belonged to the Junior Welfare League and was elected an officer, so that came out in the paper. I imagine it came out in the little Chester paper. They used to have a lot of people that would be visiting, and when we were in the service, when my husband was in the service, when we would come home, of course, that would be in the little Chester paper that we had been home. It has really changed. The world has really changed. I would hate to be raising a family, raising children in this day and time, because when when we were young, we could just go and do whatever things we wanted to without being afraid of people or being afraid that something would happen. We would just roam the woods, and I never think about people teaching their children to drive in this day. It's really so different from when I learned to drive, because there's so much traffic and so that would be a difficult thing. There's so much on television that I would not want my children, if I were raising children at this time, to see. And we didn't have that problem because we didn't have television when I was growing up. The world is different in that we know so much more about the rest of the world, not just our little spot in Rodman. It's a lot to comprehend. Holidays were special. Christmas Eve was always spent with my grandmother, and all of the cousins would be there. We probably had about 35 on Christmas Eve at her house. And in that time, we didn't have a whole lot of money for gifts. It was a pair of socks or a handkerchief or something simple. But it didn't matter, we were getting together. We spent Christmas Day at my granddad's house, and I remember one year it snowed on Christmas Day, and we went over there in the snow, and that was a special memory. 4th of July was always special. We had a 4th of July picnic that still goes on today. At that time, we met in a creek, at a creek place, and that was just our highlight for the summer, was that 4th of July picnic. And it still goes on. It doesn't have it at the creek anymore, but we still have it. My granddad, I guess, he lived to be 93. He was quite a character. He loved to fish. His wife died. My grandmother died before I was born, so I don't know her. And he was lonely. He would come and visit quite often. Always had some kind of dry wit about him. He liked to fish. He would worry my mother to death, because even in his old age, he would still go down to fish, and she was so worried about him getting hurt on the creek bank. Lots of people gathered at his house because he was just that type of person. He was a merchant. He owned a store in Mando, and when he left there, he built his house where was his family home, and had a little store on the corner. So he was in the store all of his life. Mm-hmm. I don't know very much.
Okay.
The Say family dates back a long time. My great-grandfather was a Presbyterian minister, and there is a good little bit of history that is around about him. My grandmother was a Crawford. I don't know a whole lot about. They just lived in the country, not too far from where we grew up. My mom her mother was a Lyle, and there's a lot of Lyles around. There was a Dr. Lyle in Rock Hill, and that he was a doctor. David Lyle was his son, and that's who David Lyle Boulevard was named from. There was some Straits, Gastons, Lyles, Hollises. I can't tell it, but there was a family story of a lady that was in the Revolutionary War, where she rode the horse to let people know what was going on.
Sure.
I wish Mama had taught me how to make her biscuits, because I loved her biscuits. They were thin biscuits, and I like thin biscuits. Unfortunately, I didn't learn that trade. Another thing that she made that I would wish I knew how to do was a lemon chess pie. Everybody would go for the lemon chess pie when Mama would fix it. And Dad would cure his own meat, and his hams were just to die for. So between Dad's ham and Mom's biscuits, ham biscuits are special. I have Mom's and Dad's Bible. I have her piano that she got when she was 9. I was lucky enough to get her doll that I guess it maybe was her first doll. I have not gotten it dressed. I've had it worked on and put back together, but I haven't had it dressed. But I think that was lucky that I got that. I went to college. I went to Winthrop and went 1 year and decided that marriage was what I wanted, and so I married after 1 year, and my husband, Ben Cox, was in the Air Force, and so we traveled a little bit in the Air Force. He was a pilot and loved being a pilot. We had 2 children while he was still in service. Then we came home, and we settled in Rock Hill. Had 2 more children after that. We met at a square dance that was at Oakley Hall, the school that I went as an elementary student. And it was, the auditorium was upstairs on a wooden floor, but they always had square dances in the summertime. And he was from Rock Hill, but he just happened to come to his uncle that lived in Edgemore, and he came to that square dance, and the rest is history. We have 4 children. Eddie was the oldest, Benjamin, Janine, and Joe. Evelyn was named Evelyn for her grandmother Cox. Benjamin was named for his dad, who was Ernest Benjamin. Jean Hodge was named for my mom and dad, and she got both names because Mom always said she didn't want her name not to be used. Like so many people then was Mary Jean or Betty Jean and so forth, and the Jean would be the middle. So I didn't want a name that I couldn't call her Jean. And Hodge was Dad's middle name, so we put the 2 together. And then Joseph was named for my brother Joseph. We were married in 1953 at Fishing Creek. It was a little tiny church and a little tiny wedding. Hot. It was July, and we had the reception at home. We honeymooned. We went to Gatlinburg and Knoxville and decided that we didn't like the mountains. We were going to the coast, so we went to the coast all in that 1 week. He joined the service about 8 months after we got married. I did go back to college after the children were born. Joseph was in the kindergarten, and I started back at Winthrop. And it wasn't easy, but I finally got my degree, got a job in Fort Mill, and went back and got my master's after. He came back and was in the car business for a while, and went into the oil business. He turned out to be jack of all trades. He could just about do whatever he determined he wanted to do. Sometimes he didn't determine to do what all I wanted him to do, but he was a smart person. And he had Lou Gehrig's disease, and he died in 1985. I think one of the favorite things was when he was going to propose to me, he put a fake ring in his pocket. And, of course, I had no idea that anything was, I hadn't even thought about that. And he pulled out that fake diamond, and he said, "How would you feel wearing one of those?" And I said, "Maybe not too bad." So the next week he gave me the real thing. A lot of conversation, a lot of give and take, not to expect perfection from anybody, a solid respect and devotion to each other. I remarried. I met Jim Cook in about a year and a half, 2 years after Ben died. And we had a fast romance. He was really special, good to me, kind to me. He had 4 children also, and he liked to tell people that were strangers, "Well, we have 8 children." And I said, "Don't tell people that." They'll wonder if I have any sense. I haven't seen very much of his children since he died, but they are in Fort Mill and very pleasant. We married in 1987. In 2007. We almost made 20 years. Jim was had the automobile mechanic garage. I taught in Fort Mill for 27 years, 3rd grade. Well, as I say, you either remember the good things or the bad ones. So you remember the outstanding students and you remember the really problem students. I had one child that he practiced basketball. His mother said he played every afternoon for 2 hours when he got home. And I have wondered if he made a success of that basketball. He was a whiz at math, so I imagine that he is in business somewhere now, but I've wondered about him. I think my proudest moment were my children when they were born, and they were proud moments then, but they're still proud moments now. They are very, they mean a lot to me, and I'm very proud of them. 4 children, 5 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. And then Jim has 4 children, and I'd have to stop and count his grandchildren. I think he had about 13 grandchildren. No, he had 8 grandchildren, but he has 2 great-grands too. I think maybe the most valuable was the respect for other people. They were good Christian people. They put God into their life strongly. They brought us up to put God in our lives, and I think our faith is strong. I think our respect for other people is strong. To do good for other people. I would like to say that I think I came from good stock. I hope they can say the same when they are grown. And I hope they can take the same values in life that have been with me, because I think those values are lifelong.